I may have mentioned to you all last week, the college has told me I got to get another picture. I got a call from the office saying, "Yeah, you don't look like that anymore." So I'm going to find somebody breaking down and actually taking another picture someday. Let's get started on part 2, playgrounds for the frustrated, the fatigued, and the infuriated. Let's do a thought exercise to start this one off. You know, you go on vacation, when you catch an airplane, there's certain things you know you're going to do, especially since 9/11, that are absolutely different than they were before 9/11. Remember how 9/11 you could go to the airport? Remember those things called observation decks? They don't have those anymore. I used to love going to those, watch airplanes land and take off. I love airplanes. You can't do that anymore. You used to be able to go to the ramp where the people were coming off the airplane and meet your guests, pick them up there. You can't get inside the airport anymore. But we have adjusted to that as the new normal. Immediately after 9/11, when I went to Grand Rapids to catch an airplane, it was right just a few days after 9/11, and maybe a few weeks and then already instituted the TSA, and she said, "I need you to undo the top button on your shirt." Then the second button on my shirt. Then she said, "You can take off your shoes." Then they told me I had to, undo my belt. She said, "Take off all your jewelry." And I said, "Okay, is that it?" She went, "Yeah." I said, "Well, after all this shit, you and I at least get married?" She can all play. That's become the new normal for all we get on an airplane and go on vacation. But try to imagine going to the beach. See, go to the beach. What are some of the things you do when you go to the beach? You know you're going to, let's go to the beach in 1947. Went to the beach in 1947 has its own sort of normal routines that might seem unusual today. Of course, you're going to take care of the food, pack for the food. You're going to get your beach ball, your favorite beach chair, maybe a book for a nice long day at the beach. But in 1947, you're also going to, if you're black, going to the beach also involves you getting the Negro book, the Negro Green book. All the usual stuff you're going to take to the beach. But then you can't go to the beach in 1947 as an African American, and I give it some real serious forethought, because going to the beach isn't just going to the beach. Going to the beach is an exercise. It's running a gauntlet. It is sort of like an obstacle course of just life. Because the Negro Green book will give you all these locations about hotels, guest houses, where you should go, where you can't go, some that may not even be listed. It's an ordeal just getting to the beach. Going to the beach has an entirely different connotation and meaning for black people in 1947. Because where you are, starting from here and getting there, requires going through a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. And not an inconsiderable amount of risk as well. In fact, depending upon where you go, where you land, what happens to you, you may not get to the beach at all. As a matter of fact, you know what? It just might be better to stay home. But here's the thing. They went to the beach anyway. Getting to the beach might require you going through something like a World War I no man's land. I always tell my students, you know how much work it takes to do that to the earth? That's the early part of World War I. So we want to talk this evening about playgrounds for the frustrated, the fatigued, and the infuriated. I'm going to let this stay for a while because it took me an hour to put that together. Let's start here. This is my home state of Maryland. When we came from the Philippines, I spent the first half of my childhood in the Philippines. When we left the Philippines and came back to the United States, we landed right there, just up in Washington, D.C., at Andrews Air Force Base. Actually over here, right here in Prince George's County. I live about maybe 30 minutes south of where Annapolis is. That's where I spent the second half of my childhood. I had absolutely no idea that that part of Maryland was so rich in the history that we're talking about. My mother eventually remarried and moved to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, that's colored in red there. Eastern Shore is beautiful. there's a car tag or a license plate that says Maryland is for crabs, and it is. I told folks whenever I go to a store or I'm going to a Michigan restaurant, see crab cake, I'm like, yeah, sure. In Michigan, but in Maryland, they take your crabs seriously. The Eastern Shore is beautiful, with all the things that go along with the Eastern Shore of Maryland, bucolic settings, slower pace of lifestyle. In fact, the further south you go on the Eastern Shore, it sometimes literally feels like you're going back in time. Every mile, get on 13 toward the Virginia state line. There are marshes, wildlife, ducks, geese, deer, all kinds of them. Of course, the watermen out there, they call the oystermen, the crabmen. There's an entire culture out there based on people called the watermen. If you're a fan of James A. Mitchell's writing, there's a book entitled Chesapeake, which is a long book, but it's well worth the read. And it's on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, where in 1818, this guy was born. His name is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was, of course, born into slavery. He never knew his mother, he never knew his father, because, as far as he can tell, his mother was raped by a slave master or a plantation owner. So he was a biracial kid growing up on a plantation. And Frederick Douglass, I found out recently, was the most photographed person in the U.S. in the 19th century. Not Abraham Lincoln, but Frederick Douglass. More pictures taken of him. A truly amazing character. And he was at practically every major development, every major incident, every major controversy in America, in a fight for freedom, that is, throughout the 19th century until he died in 1895, to include the start of the Civil War. He lobbied Abraham Lincoln all the way through that 4-year conflict, where you see here this image of Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain of the 20th Maine giving the order to attack the six bandits and attack down the hill on day 2 of the Battle of Gettysburg, saving the position at Little Round Top. And then on July 18, 1863, just about a few weeks after Gettysburg, the men of the 54th Massachusetts made a frontal assault at Fort Wagner, South Carolina. Frederick Douglass had been very significant, instrumental in recruiting black men for the United States Colored Troops, the 54th, and other units as well. But after 4 years of warfare, this statistic still stuns me, that the Civil War still took more American lives than every other conflict combined that we've ever fought. The American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, the Philippine Insurrection, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, and most recently Afghanistan. You have to say to yourself, whatever they were fighting about for those 4 years, that must have been really important to them, and they must have been really angry about it, to kill that many people on our soil. But when the war is over, presumably, things are supposed to be better. American to that period called Reconstruction. Debates go on to this day about whether or not Reconstruction was a failure or a success. Slavery had been overthrown, not ended, but overthrown by the force of warfare. The 13th Amendment had been passed, amending the Constitution, which outlaws slavery. As far as one can outlaw such a thing, we have people who are determined to make it live anyway. The 14th Amendment had updated the Constitution, made it a document that took it from a late 18th century document, an appropriate 19th century document, and finally positioned it to be in the 20th century. And the 15th Amendment had been passed in the Constitution, which essentially gave black men, sadly not women, but only black men the right to vote. But there are some lingering consequences about the initial bargain, the initial devil's bargain that had been made when the Constitution had been written in 1787. Questions still remain. Like, for example, that whole thing about we the people. Really? We fought a civil war, but are we there yet? Are we ready yet? Are people actually ready for that to be a reality? And then there are lingering questions into the 20th century. I mean, deep into the 20th century about, are they really human or are they really something else? Let me put it to you like this. Never mind what the answer is. The mere fact that people are asking the question is a problem. So I can imagine, I believe, I understand totally that people sometimes resorted to Psalm 13, verses 1 and 2. How long, O Lord, will you forget me? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? There is something about black people in the black church. You can take any given Sunday, if a preacher is talking about the children of Israel, there is an automatic identification with their plight. 400 years of slavery, the Exodus, movie 5, and a oppressor that was to keep you in chains and bondage. So there's an understanding there that something like this is going on in history. This is not the first time. So indeed, since it's not the first time, how long, O Lord, must this go on? And by the way, God, I need a vacation. Enter this guy, Charles Ramon Douglas. Charles Ramon Douglas was the son of Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist, editor of the North Star newspaper, suffragist, official to Haiti, an official in Washington, D.C. Frederick Douglass, his life all by itself, what I told myself is, his life all by itself, given what he did when he did it, removes all my excuses for not doing the best I can in the 21st century when I have significantly less challenging me. Now, Charles Ramon Douglas, Frederick Douglass' son, here's his obituary. The late Charles Ramon Douglas, just bear with me, scholars, as I read this, was born in Lynn, Massachusetts, October 21st, 1844. So just a few years before the Mexican-American War that'll finish gathering up all the land that'll make up the lower 48. He served in the 54th Massachusetts, that same unit that stormed Fort Wagner on July 18, 1863, and a frontal assault. By the way, before that assault, they were told you were guaranteed to lose more than half of your unit. In a military unit today, if a military commander loses half of the unit, even if you're approaching that, you'll be guaranteed they'll be court-martialed and spend some time behind bars. They were devastated on that day. The 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. On December 7, 1880, he helped to organize the Capital City Guards Battalion, in which he served as a captain and a major. The organization is now the 1st Separate Battalion, National Guard of Washington, of the District of Columbia. In 1867, he became the second colored appointee to a first-class clerkship in the War Department. You won't find more traditional organizations than the War Department or the Defense Department. He was detailed from the Treasury Department in 1871 to accompany the Santo Domingo commissioners. So this guy has some experience, has some talent, and people clearly respected him and his abilities there, and he was competent, and so he was assigned to these jobs, which in the late 19th century was pretty amazing for a black man to have, even the son of Frederick Douglass. So there he is. He's this well-educated, experienced, combat veteran, survivor of the Civil War, a person that has had several appointments, several important jobs, and he goes to a beach in Maryland to buy some land. And is told, you can't have land because of being colored. So bear with me as I read. Thinking about starting his own summer resort so that he would never suffer such an indignity, Charles purchased some 40 acres of beachfront property for $5,000. Or I think the statistic was it's the equivalent of $170,000 today. He then divided his tract into 104 lots, which he then sold to friends, family, and other black elite. The resort community of Highland Beach welcomed his first visitors in 1893. So, this became a playground for Charles Ramon Douglas and the members of Washington, D.C.'s black elite. Now, in putting this together, I called my sister and I said, Carolyn, do you know about this beach? She went, no. She said, well, so I told her about it. I said, it's for Washington, D.C.'s black elite. She went, that's why you never heard of it. You're not elite. You should never call your sister. But this became a go-to place in the early 20th century. Before the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Highland Beach, just one of several beaches in Maryland, served as a refuge for some of Washington's most prominent artists, politicians, and activists. Now, in 1964, is near remember the Beetle invasion? The English invasion they called it? See, I can do this safely. Do you remember when y'all go, yes? My usual clientele goes, well, no, not really. People like Langston Hughes the poet. Langston Hughes the poet of the Harlem Renaissance as well. People like Mary Church Terrell, the suffragists. Many cottages are still owned by the descendants of the resort's original denizens. Most black Washingtonians never had the chance to visit Highland Beach during the Jim Crow era. Now, here's the thing, right? You have to love humanity. On the one hand, they go there because of Jim Crow segregation. Then they get there, what do? They make restrictions based on class. So middle and lower class black people don't have access, then or now, apparently. So there were alternatives to Highland Beach, and there were Carr's Beach, Sparrows Beach, and Oyster Harbor. Since segregation, many of those sites have been radically transformed, or they disappeared altogether, one of them being Carr's Beach. And again, this is only 30, 40 miles up the road from where I grew up. I had no idea. But again, I'm not elite. Carr's Beach is an interesting kind of place, or was an interesting kind of place. These are pictures from Highland Beach. And you can see that the people who were there, they do appear to be from that era's upper class. They're well-heeled. Just the way they carry themselves, they carry themselves, and they sit with dignity and in class, and a sense of awareness of who they are. So Carr's Beach would have been right here. Sparrows Beach. I was trying to find a map for Oyster Beach, but Sparrows Beach and Carr's Beach, see how close they were. And again, in between, so these are the two places where other folks go, and then there's still Highland Beach, which is where the elites are going for their enjoyment. Carr's Beach. Carr's Beach had concerts, teenagers, disc jockeys, the stuff that young people like to do. Music, dancing, fun. I found out about a guy named Hoppy Adams. And I said to myself, the first thing I thought about, now that is the kind of name that'll certainly get you beat up on the playground in first grade. But Hoppy Adams was a very popular DJ. Look at this. See this? They're sitting right next to Hoppy Adams' car. W-A-N-N. He's very popular, and he was apparently a big draw, and Hoppy Adams came to Carr's Beach on numerous occasions and turned those discs and played the music, and folk had a good time. This is the young Sarah Vaughan, the vocalist, during Carr's Beach. A group of Annapolis teenagers in Carr's Beach posed for a picture during a break in the Lionel Hampton. I mean, big names, right? From jazz and music, movie stars, Aretha Franklin, Tina Turner I even saw. But in the 1980s, things were happening at Carr's Beach, Sparrows Beach, and Oyster Beach. Once the Civil Rights Act had been passed in 1964, things were started changing. In other words, once the Civil Rights Act had been passed, and black people had other options, other places to go, to start exercising their choices. So these places, which were still running, they began to fade as far as their ability to attract the talent and attract the clientele, although Highland Beach still maintained its upper class appeal. The people that had the cottages there in Highland Beach, they still have those cottages today. They pass those down to their descendants. Yeah, this is from a group called Pollard Funkadelic. And I remember my elders were upset about these guys. Okay? George Clinton was the lead player, the lead singer. So things were changing in the 70s and the 80s, just like as time was moving on in history, and the situation with the beaches and the resorts were changing, so too were hairstyles. Those all those nicely dressed teenagers you saw, at Happy Beach, or rather at Happy Adams concert, they're not like that anymore. They're wild, they're outlandish, they're wearing all kinds of things. They're pushing the envelope, so to speak. Hey, how'd that get in there? Listen, most recently in 2023, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, there's been a movement afoot to save Carr's Beach and Sparrows Beach. And in 2023, Governor Larry Hogan announced that Maryland was going to provide $4.8 million to the purchase of waterfront property to develop a new public park in Annapolis because Carr's Beach has almost disappeared. There have been people who are preservationists, very similar to what CJ's doing in Idlewild, who have been trying to grab the remnants of Carr's Beach and save it, so if they can't be for just African Americans only, they can at least preserve the legacy of it. And it's nowhere near as big as it was, but there's still enough of it for people to remember and put some historical markers. Governor Hogan said, "We are proud to partner with the city of Annapolis to reclaim part of this beautiful waterfront area that is of such great historic and cultural significance. As a major music venue and beloved gathering place for generations of Black Marylanders, Carr's Beach left an incredible legacy that we will now be able to preserve for posterity." I thought about, while putting this together, I said, Todd Brokaw was right in calling the World War II generation the greatest generation. They really were. Think about what they went through. That generation that went to fight in Europe and the Pacific, before they did that, they endured the Great Depression. Before they did that, many of them, quite frankly, served in World War I. So not one, but 2 world wars. So they fight the First World War, supposed to make the world safe for democracy. It doesn't. Then there's the Great Depression. They fought somehow both of that. Then they got to fight the Nazis, the Japanese militaries too. Yeah, that's pretty great. But this generation of Black people, who also went to fight in the Pacific and Europe, they had to come back and build these beaches like this. They were the most courageous generation. How about that? Because to go to the beach in this day and time, you have to have courage. Because you can literally be killed. Let me specify, like Isaac Woodard, 1946, World War II veteran coming home from Europe. He just got out of the army. Was on a bus going home to a town in South Carolina, to a small town in South Carolina, and got into a verbal confrontation with the bus driver, who pulled into another small town, told a policeman, and the police officer, the sheriff, beat Isaac Woodard until he was blind. He was still in his uniform. Coming home. He just got out of the army that day. So I don't want to minimize or diminish or pull back from the fact that to do this in this day and time was dangerous, with great lethal potential. Going to the beach meant something different. You could go, you might not make it, or you might not come back, if you get there at all. And this guy right here is the leader of an organization called Blacks of the Chesapeake. His name is Vince Leggett. And I tried to find as many personal testimonies from people like Vince Leggett and other people so that you can understand what it meant to be able to go someplace or to have a space of recreation. Imagine that. Now, again, let's go back to that thought exercise. Let's go to the beach. Well, all right, like I said, you pack the food, you pack the beach ball, you pack the chair to get your book, you pack the Negro Green book. But on the way there, imagine that. On the way there, you pull out of your drive there, wherever you start from, you're driving past Jim Crow signs. The kids are in the back seat. You have to stop at certain gas stations, at certain places. Everything that you're passing on the way to your destination is reinforcing the fact that there's this environment outside of your car that tells you that going to the beach is something different. And your children are growing up in that environment. Everything is being reinforced time and time again, compounded all over the night to let you know who you are, where you are, what your place is in society. And that going to the beach for you is not normal. So, going to the beach, being able to have an outlet, being able to have someplace to breathe without harassment, without having fear for your life. What did it mean for Vince Leggett? He said, for a young kid out of East Baltimore, it was fabulous to see the Chesapeake Bay. And if you have not seen the Chesapeake Bay, I dare you to drive across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge and not have your breath taken away. I almost said stop me properly. Please don't stop me properly, bridge. To see the boats, Ferris wheels, to hear music, to smell the salt air, the seagulls, fish frying. These are just kind of normal things that, you know, human beings like to do when they're having a good time. People playing cards. It was a vacation, and for people coming out of the city, this was a major thing to do. And again, we also need to understand that coming out of the city as East Baltimore, understand that in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, one of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. will be fighting against, just as he's fighting hard against Jim Crow segregation in the South, he's fighting against the ghettos and segregation in the North as well. Ghettos in the North, or the conditions of cities in the North, were just as trying, just as taxing. So being able to get out of that urban environment, and Baltimore has always been a kind of rough and industrial city. Let's see, the Chicago is a city with big shoulders than it is, but Baltimore has its own kind of toughness that you have to be very familiar with. Decades ago, when segregation was still the rule, these beaches were accessible to anyone. Black Africans from all over the East Coast would come vacation here, from all over the East Coast, from New York, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Baltimore, the East Coast. They come up from Richmond, Virginia, because Richmond, after all, is in the South, it's in Virginia, the mother of presidents. So these beaches were a refuge. People come from all points of the compass to do what? Fry fish, play cards, see the seagulls, smell the salt air. It shouldn't be interpreted, or I don't think that reaches the level of being a threat, socially, politically, economically, but somehow the fact that you have those beaches suggests that they were deemed a threat. Billie Holiday came there. Lionel Hampton came there. James Brown. Okay, I said, they really used to wear their hair like that? I remember that afro. The Temptations came there. All-time greats like James Brown, Duke Ellington, and the Temptations performed at the privately owned resort. The owners of the Cards Beach would be driven to sell to Anne Arundel County. And again, Anne Arundel is just to the north of Prince George's County, my county. And so what Anne Arundel did, what they didn't take by eminent domain, they turned Cards Beach into a distant memory, but now the goal is to bring those memories back to life. In other words, they're trying to do at Cards Beach the same thing that CJ is doing up in Idlewild. The ex-lieutenant governor, Governor Hope is out of office now, so his lieutenant governor, his mother was there as a child. He said, my mother came here when she was younger in the late 1940s. Other family members came down here for the entertainment. That was a time when there were very few places, particularly in beach areas, at a time when folks didn't have air conditioning either. Imagine that. Now you're this-legged, you're in rough and tumble Baltimore, it's hot, it's in the South. Now Maryland may not be Georgia hot, but believe me, it's powerful hot in Maryland, especially in August. So there you are. He said his mother, the lieutenant governor's mother, in the late 1940s, she went there too. At a time when folks didn't have air conditioning, to be able to come to an area that was a little cooler. So it's important to me, given that this was the last section, the last area that could be preserved, meaning that the beach has been taken over by gated communities, senior centers, and other kinds of development along the lake, the shoreline, could be preserved for their beach, I thought was extremely important. So there's still in the area a deep emotional attachment. In other words, the people that used to use that beach, they're not in the great beyond, they're with us right now. They remember what it meant to them right now. So these Americans who are living with us right now, they're shaped by that experience. And in his case at least, he's governing, or was governing in Maryland. Part of his governance, part of what makes him him, part of where he brings to the table when it comes to policies, was also part of what happened to him as a kid growing up through this experience. Our history is not some distant memory. Our history is a living, breathing thing, which is here with us right now, constantly knocking on the door. The mayor of Annapolis, amazing guy. What he said in the attempt to restore the beach. This place was a respite from racial segregation. This is for me a sacred spot that simultaneously hardens the disgusting era of Jim Crow. segregation in America, but also the home of the beautiful sounds of soul, jazz, and R&B music. On these sandy shores, African Americans, despite racist policies and segregations, were able to create something brave, beautiful, and meaningful. This is an amazing thing coming from Gavin Buckley. Now, Gavin Buckley, the mayor of Annapolis, he's still the mayor of Annapolis today. So when this initiative started, he was the mayor, he's still the mayor of Annapolis. Gavin Buckley knows a thing or two about discrimination and segregation because he was born in South Africa. Remember apartheid? That apartheid. He was born in South Africa and raised in Perth, Australia. So he has an international worldview that shaped his approach to things. So South African birth plus Australian growing up equals him being the mayor of Annapolis. He's a dynamic guy. Now in the North and the Midwest, we talked about Idlewild, of course, but in the North and the Midwest, especially in Indiana, one of you all mentioned this to me last week, I can't remember which one of you all did, but there was a place in Indiana, in the 1920s especially, Indiana must have been a tough place to try to go on vacation if you were a black person. In Indiana during the 1920s, Indiana, I cannot explain this, I have not been able to figure this out, but I think some scholars who have looked at this and figured out, touch upon this. But for some reason, Indiana during the 1920s especially had more Ku Klux Klansmen in the state than any other state in the Union. More than any state. Of all the other states, Indiana was the one that led the pack. Kokomo, the sign says, this is an initiation ceremony. This is in Hartford City, Indiana. Kokomo Ku Klux Klan initiation, another one. And then this one, Marion, Indiana. Marion, of course, having the other infamous incident that occurred on August 7, 1930 when they did a double homicide, lynching A. Smith and Tommy Shipp on the tree outside the courthouse. And then there's that picture that shows the mob of people who were there that gathered to take a photo, looking to the eye of the camera, so looking at you. And I always tell my students that, never mind A. Smith and Tommy Shipp in the tree, they're dead and gone. What's more interesting is the fact that everybody is there at the scene of a double homicide, looking to the eye of the camera. There's not a look of worry, concern, or even fear on their faces. They know that somehow the economics, the politics, the culture, the legal system of their time, that it's possible to kill two people called A. Smith, Tommy Shipp, get away with it, go home and sleep well that night, and nothing will happen to you because somehow the politics, the laws, the culture, the economics, it all says you can do that. What does it say that? Because it doesn't. So Indiana is rough country. But what happened was that the Indianapolis Times, originally published as a Sun in 1888, moved this particular site in the 1920s and led a crusade against the Ku Klux Klan, exposing the Klan's influence in Indiana politics. That is, it practically ran state politics at one time. Scholars, look, I had a young African-American female tell me a few years ago, she was in one of my classes, she said, Professor Johnson, when I drive down 65 in Indiana, she said, I pray to God that my car doesn't stop near Marion. Some of these other small towns. So this is in the 21st century, she's telling me this. So even today, there's still this worry. So the Indianapolis Star or Times helped to blow the lid off of all this. But in Indiana, even in Indiana, there was a resort called Fox Lake that was established in the 1920s that offered the black middle class families from Indiana and nearby states a refuge from Jim Crow discrimination. Now I don't have all of it up there, but there's a group of businessmen that say, you know what, folks need some place to let their hair down, to stand down, have a good time. So they invested, very much like Idlewild. People that say, look, it's good as a humanitarian gesture, and it'll probably be good for business too. And just like with Collins Beach and Sparrows Beach, where people came from all parts of the campus, when it came to Fox Lake Resort, people came from where? From nearby areas as well. So think about this. People are coming not just from Indiana, but they're crossing state lines, which means they're still taking their hearts and families' lives into their hands and driving with their Negro book to this place where they can finally get there and breathe, exhale. By 1940, the Fox Lake Property Owners Association fought to meet the growing community's social and infrastructure needs. Then they transformed it to a desirable vacation destination for residents and visitors. Really interesting. Located there near Angola. Michigan, of course, had Idlewild, as we know. Now, if Indiana had the Ku Klux Klan and was being overrun by them, Michigan had a peculiar kind of history with this organization, especially one called the Black Legion. Yes, they really dressed up in that kind of uniform, with pirate hats, black clothing. This organization was founded by a dentist. I don't know what a dentist is doing and getting involved in this, but a dentist in Southern Ohio who thought that the Ku Klux Klan was too tame. They weren't aggressive enough. And of course, they targeted black people, they targeted Jews, they targeted Catholics. Idlewild, as we mentioned last week, as you all have heard, Idlewild will be that another resort where people will come from where? All 4 points of the compass to find some place where they can vacation with dignity and breathe and just have a good time. Further south, in a place called Atlantic Beach in South Carolina, is another black resort area. I was telling Michelle that the more I did research on this, I kept finding one resort after another. There were a lot of them that existed. Now, I'm not going to say there were in the hundreds, but there were a lot of them, far more than I thought there were. For example, Oak Bluffs, near Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard wasn't available to black people, not all black people. But Oak Bluffs, Sag Harbor, New York, Carrs Beach, Holland Beach, we mentioned that, Atlantic Beach. Even on the West Coast, just outside of Los Angeles, there were places where people could go to relax. And as far as Oak Bluff is concerned, they've had some really famous visitors vacationing there. I say, hey, I know that guy. Well, I recognize that guy. What's going on? The question that comes to mind then is, why America? Why was it necessary? Why did what happened? Why did this happen? Why did these kind of communities have to be built? I mean, I'm glad they were. I'm glad that people had some place to go, but why? Well, there may be some responses to that. First off, we know that what was going on during that period was filled with fear, hate, and bigotry. That's why those places were necessary. That people wanted to be human beings and have decent housing, they're getting the right to vote, anything like that, and to work against these things. And there was also a good amount of ignorance and cowardice. So thank goodness for the men who invested in Idlewild and the business people who invested in Fox Lake. But the reason why I started thinking about this may be the most courageous generation, on April 3rd, 1968, the day before he was assassinated, his last speech, right at the end of it, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, well, I don't know what happened now. We got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now. Because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, he said. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Those resort areas were a nice stopgap, a nice place to pull off into a rest stop and catch your breath, recharge your batteries, and prepare yourself for the next stage of whatever struggle still remained in front of them to get to the promised land. They were a promised land in a storm. They were a refuge. They were a place, a playground for people who were frustrated, obviously, fatigued, every minute of every second of every hour of their day was confronted with or saturated with the fact that being told you don't belong here, you're not good enough, or some variation of that same message, or those two messages combined. So to be able to step off the beaten path and go to a place called Sag Harbor, or Carr's Beach, or Sparrow's Beach, or Oak Bluff, or Fox Lake, or Idlewild. Imagine the kind of rejuvenative, energizing moment that must have been to help them recharge and go back and get right back into the fight to win the next stage. And we're talking about voting, we're not talking about jobs, we're not talking about housing, we're talking about vacationing. The struggle to vacation. I would suggest that since we're living in a time where folks don't want these kind of stories to be told, that if you want to resist, help out, tell the story. They're out there, the information's out there to be found. And I applaud you all for coming out. I applaud the museum, and thank you to Ricky and Michelle for hosting me and anybody else who's spoken on this, because I don't think, as an historian, we don't get better by keeping it suppressed and being ignorant. Like King said, in the end, we'll remember the words, not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. If you're taking no interest in such a thing, there's a book written entitled The Land Was Ours, How Black Business Became White Wealth in the Coastal South. There's another book by the guy who's restoring Carr's Beach and Sparrow's Beach by Vince Leggett, called The Chesapeake Bank Through Ebony Eyes. This book is interesting. There was a guy named Lawrence Otis Graham. Now, Lawrence Otis Graham was what they call born into what the black upper class. I read this book years ago, and there's one part of the book where Lawrence Otis Graham, he's deceased now, but he said, well, we weren't really part of the wealthy people that went to Martha's Vineyard. I'm thinking, like, you went to Martha's Vineyard? That would have been, that's pretty big stuff to me right there. Because our house only had 8 rooms. Our neighbor's house had 10 rooms. I went, poor you. But he gives us an inside look at the upper class, our kind of people, Lawrence Otis Graham. He also went undercover. Did a really crazy thing, went undercover and worked at apparently a wealthy, exclusive golf club or country club to see how he was treated, and wrote a book about that as well, entitled Member of the Club. And then he also wrote this one too. The true story of America's first black dynasty. I think it's Blanche K. Bruce, who was a senator post-Civil War, senator during Reconstruction from Mississippi. And then for our Michiganders, talking about the Black Legion, there's this book right here, which is a very, very good book. The Terror in the City of Champions. Murder, baseball, and the secret society that shot Depression-era Detroit. That would be the Black Legion. I will email this. I'm ready to email it to Michelle. If you all want, I'll have her forwarded to you all so you can get the books if you want. But I would say that these people that had the courage to go on vacation, imagine, let's go to the beach. It means something different in 2023 than it did in 1947. 1947, you had to plan like a military operation. And know what there's ingress, then egress. Evacuation, if things went sideways. It's not just going to the beach. But I'm so glad that they went. I'm so glad that they stood down. I'm so glad that they had a good time. I'm so glad that we're talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. It started. There we go. Thank you so much again for being here. Okay, we already have one question. Hang on.
Fred, there was one on the West Coast with a government rule by eminent domain.
But what?
There was on the beach on the West Coast LA area, the government took a rule by eminent domain. Just recently, the government says,
yes,
okay, we're going to pay them millions of dollars to compensate
That's right.
the family.
That's right.
Could you add on to that?
I cannot remember remember the name of that? He's talking about there was a beach, a Church of Beach near just outside of Los Angeles. It's owned by black people, and they sold it to the government. Now they're promising to redevelop it, you know, set it aside as part of the legacy of this history. But some people, say it's just a sad thing that they didn't hold on to it. Well, they made him an offer they couldn't refuse, I guess.
Bruce's Beach.
Thanks, CJ. Bruce's Beach. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, Michelle. Bruce's Beach. Thanks, CJ.
I know this is history, but are we forgetting that black children, Spanish children, Arab children go to school together all the time in the United States? They go to the beach together, but way back what you're talking about, they didn't, but they do now, don't they? Have you been to the beach and not noticed that there are different colored people there?
Let me put it this way. In 1954, the Supreme Court struck down school desegregation by saying, you must desegregate the schools with all due deliberate speed. In Prince George's County, where I grew up, by 1975, they still had not done that. That's 21 years later. Have things changed by then? Yeah, they have. Were they abandoned the law? No. And since then, they have resegregated in Prince George's County. So there have been changes where, yeah, integration of the schools has occurred, but somehow the strange working human beings, where there have been people gathering over here, other people have been finding a way to resegregate over there. So while I celebrate the fact that there may be different groups of people celebrating on the beach today, there are still places around the country where we have to struggle to make that a reality. So yeah, kudos to the people that are making that happen, but I'm not backing out the fact that we still have work to do in this Democratic Republic.
Dr. Johnson, can you tell us, I hope I'm getting this right, so I hope I don't embarrass myself. The Klan was in Michigan, we know, and the Klan was in Nuevo and White Cloud. Do you, I know you have a lot of memorabilia. Do you have anybody's KKK card?
Well, I did have a student a number of years ago, CJ, that came to me and he had a KKK recruitment flyer from out near Grand Rapids. Oh, what is it? Starts with a C.
Caledonia?
Yes, Caledonia. And so he brought me, he brings me this KKK flyer. He said, Professor Johnson, I thought you want this. Why? Are you expecting me to join? No, I say, yeah, I do collect that kind of stuff. And then there was another incident that occurred in 2004. 2004 in Kalamazoo, only 50 minutes from here, or just an hour from here, where the American Nazis, neo-Confederates, and of course Ku Klux Klansmen gathered out in Kalamazoo because they were gathering there to help the police who had not asked them to come. The Kalamazoo police said, you know what, please don't help us, don't come. But they came. And they were saying all these little vile stuff that these folks say. And my colleague at the time, Dr. David Shaw, this was another phase of the documentary that we were shooting. David said, Fred, there's going to be a Nazi rally. You want to come with me? David, no. But he went out there and he got the footage, and he shot it, and it's raw footage that I show it to the students every now and then. I got it on DVD. When you see what these guys are saying, they're dressed in khaki pants, boots in their blouse and whatnot, black shirts with the armband with the swastika on them. And I go, if you know anything about the Nazis during World War II, or the neo-Confederates, you have to ask yourself, why, as an American citizen, millions of Americans died fighting these guys? What on earth is their ideology, given what it is, could possibly attract you to them? So, we're up there, and I mentioned it to you all last week, but we were actually going around getting videos in Wallace and some of these other places. We went to some small towns around Cadillac, and near there, in Nuevo, where I got out of the van one time, went to a gas station to get a soft drink, and the looks I got, those had been bullets coming out of their eyes, I'd be dead where I stood. So, not to mention, I've seen a lot of Confederate flags hanging around up north. Not so much down here, but up the further north you go, it's really a bizarre thing. And it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the Civil War, but everything to do with the 20th century and the 21st century and what people choose to remember about that war, which frankly is very little about the actual Civil War itself.
So, can I give you an Idlewild story of
Go ahead.
the Confederate flag?
I'll give you one about a tree growing out of a restaurant roof.
So, Memorial Day, right, that we celebrate those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. There was a pontoon that came on the lake that Saturday morning, Idlewild Lake, the main of the 7 lakes in the Black Resort. And it started out just as a regular pontoon ride early, 7:30 a.m. By about 8 o'clock, they had raised a Confederate flag in Idlewild on Memorial Day. I think what they did not take into consideration that there were a number of people, both on the lake and in the community, who not only abhorred that, but who were, let me just say that they were not gun shy. So there was some verbal thing like, what are you doing? Do you know where you're at? This is a free country. We can do what we want to. Well, what happened when they tried to come back to the boat launch, there was only one. There were about 8 cars and about 15 people. Again, now it's 8:15 a.m. They could not get the boat off the launch because there were some cars that had parked there. And there were some exchanges. And the people let them know in no uncertain circumstances that this was probably not the best thing to do, not just because of the holiday, but because this was the largest opening of the public resort. And this happened just about 3 years ago,
So,
right after COVID.
2019 then. Yeah. That's interesting and sad.
Yes.
Yeah. Others?
Everyone's thinking really hard, so. And
Thank you.
pondering and reflecting, which is all very good and positive, so. Okay, yes.
Yes.
This is the first talk that I've come to, so I didn't hear what you said last time. But how did the black people acquire this land if they couldn't own land to begin with?
In the case of Idlewild, and also in the case of Fox Lake, there were white businessmen who bought land and then made it available. All right, then black people eventually moved there, they bought homes, and built homes, the usual thing of home acquisition, mortgages and so forth. So over time, became more black ownership became more and more of a reality. But the initial purchase of the land, at least, was through a business venture. Now, in the case of Highland Park, Frederick Douglass' son bought that himself. And then there are other wealthy black people in the DC area that bought more land. So it's a combination of sometimes from outside the community or inside the community, people that had the money to buy it, bought it. And they kept it inside the family. Just like, people go up north. One of the things I had to learn when I first moved to Michigan, when people talked about a cottage, I thought a cottage was like, a small log cabin in the wood. In Michigan, they don't mean that. It means something, it could be a big home. These things have been passed on through the generation from one family member to another one. So that's what they've done out there. So the land can come from a variety of sources, but at least in Idlewild's case of Fox Lake, there's external investment by people that just, and I don't know what the actual motivation was for the guys that bought the land in Idlewild, or the guys that bought the land in Fox Lake, other than just the raw recognition that, it's just a good human thing to do. And so they did it. And it wasn't bad for business either. Because if you can get the Four Tops and Tina Turner and James Brown and Martin Luther King community area, yeah, who can't love that? Yes.
Fred, I was told I was born at 6 p.m. town. It means all blacks out at 6 p.m. A 6 p.m. town, all blacks
Yeah,
can work
it's
there.
a
6
sundown.
p.m. you leave.
Sundown town, those
DeKalb,
towns-
Illinois, Northern Illinois University's there now.
Yes. There were, in the late 19th, early 20th century, a thing called sundown town, where black people understood and were told, you need to be gone by the time the sun goes down, you need to be gone. That was a reality, yes. And while that's not so much of a formal reality today, there are still different communities inside the United States that will suggest strongly you shouldn't be there. When I was doing my doctoral research, my advisor told me I had to find the original railroad tracks to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Well, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad began construction in 1828. And by the time I'm doing this in the 21st century, well, it's kind of old. So I went to West Virginia University one day, and I was talking to a guy who I saw a guy, he had been in the stacks and looking at maps and railroad maps. I heard him talking to the archivist. So I said, that guy didn't sound like he knew what he was talking about. I talked to the archivist could not help me. I've been down there several times, going through the geodetic surveys and all these things, could not find the tracks to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. So I went up to this guy just on a lark and said, look, I heard you talking to the archivist. Do you know where the original railroad is for the Vietnam? He goes, yeah. So he, from memory, he gets on a piece of paper, he draws this map. I thought, wow. So he said, look, all you gotta do is just go down here through Morgantown and turn down, Turkey Foot Road, and go down Raccoon Run Road, go down, Highway 2, get the Raccoon Run Road, and drive over here. And every time he says something like Turkey Foot Drive and Raccoon Run Road, I'm getting more and more nervous because it's like 3:30 in the afternoon, and the mountains, it gets darker because the mountains extended shadow. But I did go down Raccoon Run Road. I did find the railroad, the Baltimore Ohio Railroad, but the last thing Eric said to me was, make sure you get out of there before sundown. That's why I was doing my PhD research. Okay, so those towns may not exist officially, but the sentiment is still there. That's what I'm trying to tell y'all. And as it turned out, it was a very cold night, and it snowed, and rain and ice, so nobody's going to get me anyway. Yes.
So I just want to respond to the lady. You had said what happened because blacks couldn't buy land. I just want to say that's not true. As a matter of fact, Dr. Annalisa Cox wrote a book called The Bone and the Sinew of the Land, and she actually gives scores of black stories of ownerships. The largest black cattle in the nation were the Greers in Lyle Station, Indiana, that's southern Indiana, in 1800s.
And also in Illinois, too.
Right.
Central Illinois.
Absolutely. So there was a black family who actually founded, I think it's Charlotte, don't quote me on that, go back to the book, from Virginia. So she only does pre-Civil War stories of blacks in the Midwestern frontier, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
Even that was 1912 in Idlewild.
And there are still lots and lots of black farmers that are still trying to hang on to the land that they've had since the Civil War.
Fred, many years ago, I remember someone telling me that there was a black beach on Lake Michigan at Muskegon. Are you aware of that by any chance, or have you ever heard of that?
No, CJ, have you heard of that?
Never heard of
I have not.
in the phone recently. It was after the 60s later, but I heard of one in the sea.
No.
It makes sense that there was a large black population.
Yeah.
Right, and it was strictly, just a black beach. But I wonder if someone could confirm that or not.
I don't know. I've heard of it. Yes, ma'am.
I've
been intrigued by the location of these black resort areas since the first meeting we had here, and one in Michigan was called Evergreen Resort. And at that time I stated I lived on Evergreen Lane in Benton Harbor. I have since gone to the Benton Harbor Museum and the Benton Harbor Library, and they did go back into the archives. The museum didn't know about it. The museum manager sent me to the woman in the library, and she was brilliant. She went back into the archives and she pulled up newspaper articles that had been printed way back in the 20s. And they did mention a place. They didn't name it Evergreen, but they said it was 6 miles north of Benton Harbor, which is exactly where Evergreen Lane was. And it was later purchased by Catholic Diocese in Chicago. And when I lived there, I knew that location as the Holy Family Camp. But in the article, when they talked about the purchase, they did say that it had been a black resort for 22 years.
And that was in the 1920s? That's right?
Yes.
Yeah. As she was talking, what I seen about some of the history Mr. Shah on Benton Harbor becomes a destination point for black people during that period called the Great Migration. It was right around 1950 when waves and waves of thousands, hundreds of thousands of black people are leaving the South, coming north. Now it's about 1915, so World War I started. There's a sneaky suspicion that America's going to get involved in World War I at some point. Industry's expanding. And now the problem with World War I is that while black people are coming, while there's a large migration internally, there's also a big migration externally. People fleeing Europe, doing what? Fleeing World War I, coming to America. They're doing what? These are largely people from Eastern Europe, because World War I starts in Serbia, Eastern Europe. They're largely Catholic. You follow what I'm going with this? They're Catholic coming to America, and many of them coming to Detroit and Michigan. So all these people coming together at one point, and the scarcity of jobs, the competition for jobs, becomes pretty acute. And so Benton Harbor, long before we're dealing with the demographic conditions today, for many, many years, Benton Harbor's migrant agricultural community were African Americans down there. So you have the numbers down there that will support a resort area, so it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. When you look at the grand meta-narrative of the historical movements, it makes perfect sense.
Any additional questions? All right, I think we'll wrap it up here then. Thank you again to all of you for being here. Thank you again to Fred. Let's
Thank
give
you.
him another round. Everyone have a great evening. Just a reminder, the Idlewild exhibit will be here until October 23rd. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, come back, okay? Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
To Ricky and the Holland Museum, thank you all for coming. Thank you.